Mr. Godrej, give me three things that you want Mr. Narendra Modi, because I have no doubt that he's going to be the Prime Minister. I'm sure the BJP is not going to elect someone else now. Three things that you want Mr. Modi to do as soon as he takes over.
Well, I think the most important things that need to be attended to is, one, the ease of doing business in India has never been very good, but it has deteriorated during the last 2 or 3 years. I think we need to restore ease of doing business, permissions, bureaucracy. I think that is the first thing that needs to be attended to. Secondly, there are several fights between the tax department and assessees because of the retrospective amendments, because of the transfer pricing rules, etc. They need to be sorted out so that both foreign investors and Indian investors start investing in a major manner. And
right,
third, I think our industrial production...
Mr. Godrej, just one second. I think our viewers should see Mr. Godrej entirely on the screen. We've got him. They should be able to see him entirely. Rahul Gandhi is still trailing in Amethi. Mr. Godrej, go ahead. You were talking about bringing back business confidence, bringing back confidence in the person who invests. Yeah.
The last point was that the industrial production is diminishing in the country. It has a negative growth rate. I think fiscal stimuli need to be provided. I think the budget, which will be presented in early July, will be a very important determinant of how rapidly we can restore ourselves to an 8% plus growth rate.
Can we go one by one, Mr. Godrej? Good morning, sir. Prashant here. Tax reforms, one sort of allegation which is thrown at the, which has been made about the UPA government is, they said revenue collection figures, tax revenue collection figures, which were very aggressive, and then the IT department was left to its own devices to figure out how to actually get to those numbers. The third point, the third thing that you said should happen is fiscal stimuli. My question is, where is the money, sir, for the government? I'm sure when the budget is presented in July, some of the earlier assumptions of tax collection, etc., will be revised by this new government. But the fact still remains that in the near term, this is a government which will have a shortage of funds.
You don't need money. You don't need money for fiscal stimuli. If you provide fiscal stimuli, the economy grows and collections grow. We have always seen in India lower rates of taxes lead to higher collections. Yet, for various reasons, we keep increasing tax rates. For example, we have a minimum alternate tax which is 20% plus surcharge. On one side, we give incentives for certain industries, for certain geographical locations, etc., and then tell company you have to pay a minimum alternate tax of 20-odd%. They can't take advantage of the incentive, so they don't invest. I think some of these tax rules need to be looked at. I am not saying that the government should collect less taxes. I'm saying the rates of taxes should be reduced, which will lead to larger collections.
Right.
Higher collections.
And when you say fiscal stimuli, can you be more precise there, sir? What exactly are you sort of looking out for?
Well, as I'm saying, reduce the rate of minimum alternate tax. It will immediately have an effect on more investments in the country. Excise duties in certain cases, they already did it in the interim budget on automobile. In certain industries, excise duties need to be reduced. Lower rates of excise duties, lower rate of VAT will lead to higher collections.
The first thing that you said was ease of doing business, which has deteriorated over the last couple of years. It was never very good, but it has really come down quite a bit last few years. So can you go into that a little bit? I mean, what exactly is business and business leaders like you sort of looking out for there? Because, one of the things which Mr. Modi has said, well, we want lesser government and more governance. Are you tying this into what Mr. Modi has said? Are those similar things, or are you talking about something else?
No, I'm talking of exactly that. He's made an excellent statement. We need less government and more governance. So less government means why should everything go case by case for central government and state government clearance? We should get things on an automatic route much more than we have. And I think that's what Mr. Modi has said during his campaign. That will help tremendously. For example, permissions, even permissions to put up a new commercial or residential building in India in most states takes up to 2 years. It's ridiculous. Why should so much time be spent on giving permissions? And why should there be so much case-by-case permissions in this country?
Do you broadly expect a much more business-friendly government? I mean, the new government, a much more, a government which encourages business, because, there has been a bit of a confrontation between business and government over the last few years. I mean, the last, actually 3 years of the UPA 2. And that, and many that we've spoken to earlier said, well, that should change and that will be a big one.
Yes, certainly. I don't think it's just a question of being more business friendly. It should be, the government needs to be more growth friendly, which automatically means that business will prosper. Also, it should be more entrepreneurship oriented. So I think, I expect, because clearly Mr. Modi in his speeches, the BJP in their manifesto, etc., have mentioned this, and I expect it will be implemented. The question is, implement it quickly. For example, the goods and services tax will add 2 percentage points to GDP growth rate, other things being equal. Now, the Congress clearly tried to pass it. They couldn't work it out. Now, if the NDA brings that legislation in, the Congress will have great difficulty opposing it because of their earlier advocacy of that legislation. If it is passed early, it will add tremendously to the growth rate of the country.
Mr. Godrej, when the UPA 2 came to power, right, there were huge expectations. If the stock market is any barometer, and it can be argued it isn't, but in a way, it does reflect how people, companies, corporates, investors are feeling about the economy, right? There was euphoria, real euphoria back then. So between then and now, so what I'm trying to ask is it now a vote against the against the Congress and the UP and its policies, or is it a vote for Mr. Modi and his policies, and people saying, well, look what he's done in Gujarat and what he can do for the country, for India? Which one is it? You can say it is both, but if you had to pick one, which one would it be? Is it Mr. Modi, or is it the bad policies of the last government? That's the reason why corporate India, in a way, turned away from the UPA and the Congress in particular.
I think it's both, definitely. You can't choose one or the other. I think clearly, as I said, ease of doing business deteriorated very considerably in the last 2 or 3 years. Growth rates started coming down. Industrial production had negative growth. So clearly, people were very concerned about the lack of effectivity during the UPA 2 regime, especially in its last 2.5 years. And I think clearly Mr. Modi's utterances on growth, on governance, on having less government in his regime, etc., have helped a lot. I think another thing, there's a great trend in India that the electorate is going for development. You see it again and again in state elections, in this national election, that people are voting for rapid development.
Mr. Godrej, would you be sort of very keen on knowing or sort of you would have certain people who would be best suited to certain ministerial posts, like the finance minister, I mean, posts related to the economy? Would that be of a great deal of interest, or is it going to be, as many have told us, it's going to be a hub and spoke model, which has been followed in Gujarat, where Mr. Modi essentially leads his bureaucrats, the Prime Minister's office will dictate policies and others basically implement?
I think the Prime Minister's office in the new government will certainly be stronger than the PMO was during the UPA regime. I also feel that good ministers, especially if they are able to bring in a couple of technocrats in some of the important ministries, could help. And generally, ministers who are willing to take quick decisions in the growth direction will certainly help.
Would you want to name any specific people, especially technocrats who you mentioned? There are a few names floating around, but we don't have any confirmation really.
Because it's a question. There are names floating around. I don't have any personal choices.
Right. You know, before you came on, I have Mr. M.S. Unnikrishnan, who is the Managing Director of Thermax. We have Pradeep Chaudhary here, who was former Chairman at State Bank of India. We were talking about how soon can growth come back. And, you know, both our guests here in the studio with us, Mr. Godrej said, well, 8%, back to 8% GDP growth in 2 years isn't unachievable. How would you respond to that?
No, I would say we can get to 8% growth rate even earlier with the right kind of policy, the right kind of budget, GST, as I mentioned. I think 8% could be reached at even an earlier date. But clearly, a lot of growth-oriented decisions have to be taken. Some of them might be tough decisions, but I think it can be even done earlier. India has great potential, and the utterances during the campaigning, to my mind, indicate that Mr. Modi and his team want to get back to a high growth rate very quickly.
Mr. Godrej, appreciate your time, sir. Thanks very much for joining in.